A beggar girl cried out for help from this millionaire. He didn't understand why, until he found out the truth. And when he did, he was furious. What happened next will shock you. Leave a like and subscribe to support my work. And tell me in the comments your birthday. The winter wind cut through Sarah's thin sweater like knives as she huddled against a brick wall, trying to make herself invisible to the early morning crowd at the Cincinnati farmers market. Her small hands, red and chapped from the cold, clutched her empty stomach as the aroma of fresh bread and apple pies tortured her senses. 3 days had passed since her last proper meal. Half a sandwich she'd found in a dumpster behind the diner on 4th Street. The 6-year-old girl watched through matted brown hair as shoppers bustled past, their arms laden with fresh produce and warm baked goods. Her throat tightened at the sight of a mother buying her son a steaming cinnamon roll, the boy's face lighting up as he took his first bite. Sarah could almost taste the sweetness on her tongue. Gathering what little courage she had left, Sarah approached a vendor selling apples and corn, their bright colors a stark contrast to the grey December morning. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse, "do you have anything to eat? Just a little bit." The vendor's face hardened as he looked down at her dirty clothes and bare feet. "Get lost, kid. I don't give handouts to beggars." He turned away, deliberately ignoring her presence as he arranged his display. Sarah backed away, tears stinging her eyes. She'd known it was useless to ask, but hunger made people do desperate things. As she wandered the streets, trying to ignore the gnawing pain in her stomach, she came upon a small wooden house with a wraparound porch. The windows were open despite the cold, and the smell of roasted chicken and mac and cheese drifted out, making her mouth water uncontrollably. Through the window, she could see a table set for dinner, steam rising from golden brown dishes. A freshly baked apple pie cooled on the windowsill, its crust perfectly crimped. Next to it sat a loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. Sarah's hands trembled as she crept closer, her heart pounding so hard she was sure someone would hear it. Just one piece, she thought, just enough to stop the pain. Her small fingers had barely grazed the bread when a woman's scream pierced the air. Sarah jumped back, but before she could run, heavy footsteps thundered toward the door. A man burst out, his face red with fury. "Thief!" he bellowed, grabbing her arm so hard she thought it would break. The next thing she felt was the sharp sting of his hand across her face, the force knocking her to the ground. Sarah scrambled to her feet, still clutching the piece of bread, and ran blindly through her tears. In her panic to escape, she collided with something solid. Looking up through tear-blurred eyes, she saw a tall man in an expensive wool coat, his leather briefcase now lying in the snow. Behind her, she could still hear the angry homeowner shouting threats. The man in the coat looked down at her, his expression changing as he took in her appearance, the red mark blooming on her cheek, the dirt and tears streaking her face, the terror in her eyes. Something in his stern features softened almost imperceptibly. "What's going on here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. The homeowner approached, still seething but hesitating at the newcomer's authoritative tone. "This little thief was stealing from my house. If we don't teach them a lesson now, they'll just keep coming back for more." The man in the coat studied Sarah more closely. She was trembling violently, but she hadn't let go of the bread. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Why are you alone?" he asked quietly. Sarah met his gaze, trying to decide if she could trust him. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of someone, though she couldn't remember who. "My mother left," she whispered, "and my father. He didn't want me anymore." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Without a word, he stood and removed his coat, wrapping it around Sarah's shoulders. It engulfed her completely, the hem dragging in the snow. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he lifted her into his arms. "I'll pay for whatever she took," he said to the homeowner, his tone brooking no argument. The man pulled out his wallet and handed over several bills, far more than the bread was worth. As he carried Sarah away from the scene, she buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the unfamiliar scent of expensive cologne and wool. She should have been terrified. Everything she'd learned on the streets told her not to trust strangers, especially well-dressed men who could afford nice things. But something about him felt safe, like a memory she couldn't quite grasp. "I'm James," he said softly as they walked. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Do you have a last name, Sarah?" She shook her head. "I don't remember. It's been a long time since anyone called me by my last name." James felt something cold settle in his chest. A child with no last name, no home, no one to protect her. It wasn't right. He'd seen plenty of suffering in his life, had even caused some of it in his ruthless climb to success. But this was different. This small, broken girl had awakened something in him he thought he'd buried long ago. What he didn't know then was that by saving Sarah, he was about to uncover secrets that would shake his carefully constructed world to its foundation. The mystery of her abandonment was far darker than he could imagine, and the truth would force him to confront demons from his own past that he'd spent decades trying to forget. As they reached his car, James noticed Sarah had fallen asleep in his arms, still clutching the piece of bread. Her face, even in sleep, held a wariness that no child should know. He carefully placed her in the back seat, making sure the coat was tucked securely around her. Looking at her through the rearview mirror, James made a silent promise, not just to Sarah, but to himself. He would protect her no matter what it took. He had no way of knowing that this promise would lead him down a path that would change both their lives forever, exposing long-buried truths that someone had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. James's spacious colonial house had never felt more empty than when he carried Sarah's sleeping form through the front door. The sound of his expensive shoes echoing off hardwood floors seemed to emphasize the hollowness of the space. He'd never noticed how sterile it all felt, the carefully curated furniture, the untouched surfaces, the absence of any real signs of life. Sarah stirred slightly as he laid her on the guest room bed, her small hands still clutching his coat like a lifeline. Even in sleep, her face held a tension that made his heart ache. How long had she been alone? How had she survived? He carefully removed her tattered shoes, revealing feet covered in scrapes and blisters. Her clothes were little more than rags, hanging off her too thin frame. James felt a surge of anger he hadn't experienced in years. Someone had done this to her. Someone had thrown away this child like she was nothing. As he turned to leave the room, Sarah's eyes flew open. The momentary panic in them struck him like a physical blow. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave." James sat on the edge of the bed, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah." "You're safe here." She studied him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "That's what they all say at first," she said quietly. "But everyone leaves eventually." The words hung heavy in the air between them. James thought of his own childhood, of promises broken and trust betrayed. He'd buried those memories deep, built his success on their foundation, but something about this girl was bringing them all back to the surface. "I'm not everyone," he said finally. "Get some rest. When you wake up, we'll get you something to eat." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the mention of food, but exhaustion was already pulling her back under. This time, when she slept, her grip on his coat loosened slightly. James made his way to his home office, his mind racing. He needed to make some calls, figure out how to handle this situation properly. But first, he needed information. Opening his laptop, he began searching missing persons reports from the last few months. Nothing matched Sarah's description. It was as if she'd simply materialized on the streets, a ghost no one was looking for. His phone buzzed. Margaret, his executive assistant. "Mr. Davidson, you missed your 2 p.m. with the board. Should I reschedule?" James glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was already late afternoon. "Cancel all my meetings for the next few days, Margaret. Something's come up." There was a pause on the other end. In 15 years, James had never voluntarily missed a meeting. "Is everything all right, sir?" "I'm not sure yet," he answered honestly, before ending the call. Hours passed as James made arrangements, calling his personal physician, ordering children's clothes and necessities for delivery, researching legal requirements for temporary guardianship. He was so absorbed in his task that he almost missed the sound of small feet padding down the hallway. Sarah stood in the doorway, swimming in his coat, which she still hadn't taken off. Her face was pale, but some of the wild fear had left her eyes. "I thought you'd be gone," she said softly. "I told you I'd stay," he reminded her. "Are you hungry?" She nodded hesitantly. James led her to the kitchen, lifting her onto one of the bar stools at the counter. He wasn't much of a cook. Most of his meals came from restaurants or his housekeeper who came during the day. But he managed to heat up some soup and make a grilled cheese sandwich. Sarah ate slowly, carefully, as if expecting the food to be taken away at any moment. James noticed how she kept one hand curled protectively around the plate, her eyes darting occasionally to the exits. What had happened to make her so wary? "Sarah," he said gently, "can you tell me about your parents?" She stiffened slightly, putting down her spoon. "My mum left a long time ago. I don't remember her much anymore." She paused, her small fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. "Dad said it was my fault she went away. He said I was too much trouble." James felt that cold anger again, but kept his voice steady. "And your father? Where is he?" "He met someone new. She didn't like kids. One day they packed up the car and said they were going to the store." Sarah's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "They never came back. I waited for 3 days before the landlord found me and kicked me out." "How long ago was this?" Sarah shrugged. "The leaves were still on the trees. Now they're gone." "Months." She'd been alone for months. "Do you remember where you lived, or your father's name?" She shook her head. "We moved around a lot. Dad said we had to keep moving or they'd find us." "Who would find you?" "I don't know. He never said. He just got scared sometimes and we'd leave in the middle of the night." James made a note to have his private investigator look into it. Someone had to be missing this child, looking for her. But a nagging voice in his head whispered that maybe someone was looking for her for the wrong reasons. That night, after Sarah had finally fallen asleep again, James sat in his office reviewing security footage from his front gate. A car had driven by 3 times in the past hour, slowing each time. It could be nothing, just a lost driver or a curious neighbor. But years of business dealings had taught him to trust his instincts. Something wasn't right. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "David, I need a favor. I need you to look into something quietly, and I need extra security at my house, starting tonight." "What's going on, James?" his old friend asked. "This isn't like you." James looked at the photo he'd taken of Sarah, sleeping peacefully, finally feeling safe enough to let go of his coat. "I found something today, David. Something that wasn't meant to be found. And I have a feeling some people aren't going to be happy about it." After hanging up, James checked the security system one more time before heading to bed. As he passed Sarah's room, he heard soft whimpers coming from inside. He found her tangled in the sheets, tears streaming down her face even in sleep. "No, please," she mumbled. "Don't leave me here. I'll be good, I promise." James gently smoothed her hair back from her forehead, and gradually her breathing steadied. Looking down at her small face, he made another silent promise. Whatever Sarah was running from, whoever was looking for her, they would have to go through him first. What he didn't know was that his protective instinct was about to put him on a collision course with forces he never expected to encounter. Forces that had been watching, waiting, and planning for months. The car that had driven by his house wasn't lost. It was sending a message. Sarah had been found, and the game was about to begin. But James Davidson hadn't built his empire by backing down from a fight. He'd faced down corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, and countless threats to his business. He thought he'd seen every kind of ruthlessness the world had to offer, but he was about to learn that some people would go to far darker lengths to keep their secrets buried. As he finally drifted off to sleep, James couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's appearance in his life wasn't a coincidence. There was something about her that seemed hauntingly familiar, like a half-remembered dream. The answer was there, just out of reach, waiting to be discovered. In her room, Sarah clutched the coat tighter, breathing in its safe, familiar scent. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the need to sleep with one eye open, ready to run at the slightest sound. She didn't know why, but something about James made her feel protected, like maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Neither of them could have known that this night marked the beginning of a journey that would unravel decades of carefully constructed lies, that the simple act of kindness that had brought them together would expose a truth so shocking it would change both their lives forever. The real question wasn't who had abandoned Sarah. It was why they needed her to disappear in the first place. The next morning, James woke to the unfamiliar sound of small feet padding around his house. He found Sarah in the kitchen, standing on her tiptoes, trying to reach a box of cereal on the counter. She froze when she saw him, her hand dropping to her side. "I'm sorry," she whispered, backing away. "I was hungry, but I shouldn't have—" "Sarah," he interrupted gently, "this is your home now. You don't have to ask permission to eat." He reached up and got the cereal box, setting it on the table along with a bowl and milk. "Sit. Let's have breakfast together." She climbed onto the chair, her movements still cautious, as if expecting to be scolded at any moment. James noticed how she kept glancing at him between bites, studying his reactions. The way she guarded her food with one arm curved around the bowl made his chest ache. "A doctor is coming to see you today," he said carefully, watching her reaction. "Just to make sure you're healthy." Sarah's spoon clattered against the bowl. "No doctors," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll find me if I go to a doctor." "Who will find you, Sarah?" She shook her head violently, pushing away from the table. "I can't. They said they'd hurt me if I ever told." James moved slowly around the table, kneeling in front of her chair. "Sarah, look at me." He waited until her frightened eyes met his. "No one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here, but I need to know who you're afraid of, so I can protect you." Sarah's lower lip trembled. "The men in the black car. They followed us sometimes. Dad would see them and we'd have to leave right away. He said they were bad people who wanted to take me away." James thought of the car that had driven by his house the night before. His jaw tightened. "Did you ever see these men? Do you know what they looked like?" "One of them had a scar," she said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Right here." She traced a line across her left cheek. "I saw him once at the park. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a nice smile." Before James could ask more questions, the doorbell rang. Sarah immediately tensed, but James squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's just Dr. Chen. She's an old friend and she's here to help." Dr. Helen Chen had been James's personal physician for years, but he'd never seen her look as concerned as she did examining Sarah. The girl's body told a story of neglect. She was underweight, had vitamin deficiencies, and several poorly healed minor injuries. But it was the fear in Sarah's eyes during the examination that truly worried the doctor. "James," Dr. Chen said quietly while Sarah was distracted by a coloring book, "this child has been through serious trauma. She needs more than just medical care." "I know," he replied, running a hand through his hair, "but there's something bigger going on here, Helen. Something dangerous. I can't just hand her over to the system." Dr. Chen studied him carefully. "This isn't like you, James. You've never been one to get personally involved in, well, anything." He looked at Sarah, who was meticulously coloring within the lines, her tongue poking out in concentration. Things change. After Dr. Chen left, prescribing vitamins and a careful nutrition plan, James received a call from David, his private investigator. "We need to talk," David said, his usually calm voice tight with tension. "Not over the phone. Meet me at the usual place in an hour." James looked at Sarah, who had fallen asleep on the couch, the coloring book still open on her lap. He couldn't leave her alone, but he also couldn't ignore whatever David had found. Making a quick decision, he called Margaret. His assistant arrived within 30 minutes, looking curious but professional as always. "This is unexpected," she said, taking in the sight of the sleeping child. "Margaret, I need you to watch her while I handle something important. She's been through a lot. Just be gentle with her." As if sensing they were talking about her, Sarah stirred, her eyes flying open in panic when she didn't immediately see James. He quickly moved to her side. "Sarah, this is Margaret. She's going to stay with you for a little while. I take care of something. I'll be back soon, I promise." Sarah grabbed his sleeve. "You said you wouldn't leave." The raw fear in her voice nearly made him cancel the meeting. But if David had found something important about her past, he needed to know. "I'm not leaving you, Sarah. I'm coming back. Margaret will keep you safe until then." To his surprise, Sarah studied Margaret intently before giving a small nod. Something about his assistant's kind face and calm demeanor seemed to reassure her. The cafe where James met David was quiet at this hour. His old friend was already waiting at their usual corner table, a thick folder in front of him. "You look terrible," David observed as James sat down. "What did you find?" David opened the folder, spreading out several documents. "The girl's real name is Sarah Mitchell, born at Cincinnati General 6 years ago to Rebecca Mitchell, and father unknown. Mother disappeared when Sarah was 2. No death certificate, no forwarding address, nothing. She just vanished." James felt a chill run down his spine. And the father? That's where it gets interesting. David pulled out a photograph of a man with hard eyes and a nervous expression. Marcus Webb, not her biological father, but he was with Rebecca when Sarah was born. He adopted Sarah officially when she was 1, small-time criminal, mostly cons and fraud. But here's the thing, he disappeared too about 4 months ago. His car was found abandoned at a gas station in Kentucky. No signs of foul play, just gone. Like someone wanted to tie up loose ends, James muttered. Exactly. But here's what really caught my attention. David slid over a yellowed newspaper clipping from 25 years ago. Notice anything familiar? James felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the old photograph. A young woman with Sarah's eyes stared back at him. This is Rebecca Mitchell, and if you look at the article, you'll see why she might have needed to disappear. As James read, his hands began to shake. Memories he'd buried decades ago came flooding back. A summer romance, a desperate phone call, a decision he'd regretted every day since. "It's not possible," he whispered. "The timing fits, James. And look at her." David pushed forward a recent photo of Sarah. "She has your mother's smile." James felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. All these years, he'd told himself he'd made the right choice, that he'd done what was best for everyone. But looking at that photo, at the daughter he'd never known he had, he realized the true weight of his actions. "She's mine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Sarah is my daughter. Yes, and someone went to a lot of trouble to keep her hidden from you. The question is, why?" Before James could respond, his phone rang. It was Margaret, her voice tight with panic. "Mr. Davidson, you need to come back now." "What's wrong? Is Sarah okay?" "She's fine, but there's someone here, a woman. She says she's Sarah's mother." James was already running to his car, the documents clutched in his hand. "Don't let them leave. I'm on my way." As he sped through the streets of Cincinnati, his mind raced. Rebecca was alive. She had come back. But after all these years, why now? What was she running from? And most importantly, what secrets had she been protecting that were worth abandoning their daughter? He didn't know it yet, But the answers to these questions would lead him down a path darker than he could imagine. The truth about Sarah's past, about his past, was about to emerge, and nothing would ever be the same. James's tires screeched as he pulled into his driveway, his heart pounding against his ribs. The security guard at the gate had confirmed that a woman had arrived, claiming to be Sarah's mother, but something about the situation felt wrong. Rebecca had spent years keeping Sarah hidden. Why would she suddenly appear at his doorstep? He found them in the living room. Sarah was curled up in Margaret's lap, her small body trembling. Across from them sat a woman with honey blonde hair and familiar green eyes, though they lacked the warmth he remembered from 25 years ago. Rebecca Mitchell had aged, but gracefully. She wore expensive clothes that seemed at odds with the story of a woman who'd been in hiding. "James," she said softly, standing as he entered. "It's been a long time." He positioned himself between Rebecca and Sarah, noting how his daughter gripped Margaret's hand tighter at the sound of her mother's voice. "Why are you here, Rebecca?" "I came for my daughter." Her voice was calm, controlled, too controlled. "When I heard she was with you, I knew I had to come right away." "Heard from whom?" James asked sharply. "How did you know where to find her?" Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I have my sources. The important thing is I'm here now. Sarah, sweetheart, come to Mommy. It's time to go home." Sarah buried her face in Margaret's shoulder, refusing to look at her mother. James felt his protective instincts surge. "She's not going anywhere with you." "I'm her mother, James." "You have no right—" "I'm her father," he cut in, watching her face pale slightly. "Yes, I know. What I don't know is why you kept her from me all these years. Why you abandoned her to a man like Marcus Webb. Why you let our daughter end up alone on the streets." Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand. I did what I had to do to protect her." "Protect her?" James's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "She was starving, Rebecca. Freezing. Terrified. What exactly were you protecting her from?" "From the truth." Rebecca's words hung in the air like smoke. "From people who would hurt her to get to me, to get to you." Margaret stood quietly, still holding Sarah. "Mr. Davidson, should I take Sarah upstairs?" James nodded, grateful for his assistant's intuition. But as Margaret turned to leave, Rebecca stepped forward. "Sarah, please, you have to come with me. It's not safe here." For the first time, Sarah turned to look at her mother. Her voice was small but steady. "You left me. You both left me." Rebecca flinched as if she'd been struck. "I didn't have a choice, baby. There are things you don't understand." "I understand that James came back," Sarah interrupted, her fingers curling into Margaret's blouse. "He promised he wouldn't leave, and he came back. You promised too, but you lied." As Margaret carried Sarah upstairs, Rebecca sank back onto the couch, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. "She hates me." "She's hurt," James corrected, though his own anger hadn't subsided. "Start talking, Rebecca. I want the whole truth, now." Rebecca pulled a cigarette from her designer purse with trembling fingers. "The truth?" She laughed bitterly. "The truth is, I never should have fallen in love with you that summer. Never should have told you I was pregnant, because the moment I did, they knew they had something to use against both of us." "Who are they?" "People who've been watching you for years, James, waiting for a weakness they could exploit." She took a long drag of her cigarette. "Did you really think you built your company without making enemies? That no one would notice the convenient coincidences, the perfectly timed acquisitions?" James felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? Your father's old partners didn't just disappear, James. They were pushed out, systematically destroyed, and someone noticed the pattern." Rebecca's eyes held a haunted look. "When they found out about me, about the baby, they saw an opportunity. They threatened to expose everything, not just about your father's dealings, but about what you did to build your empire." James's mind raced back through the years, through decisions he'd justified as necessary for success. He told himself the ends justified the means, that sometimes people had to lose for others to win. But he'd never imagined those choices would come back to threaten his child. "So you ran," he said quietly. "I ran to protect her, to keep her away from all of it." Rebecca's hands shook as she stubbed out her cigarette. "But they found us anyway. Marcus was supposed to keep us hidden, but he got greedy, started asking for more money. Then he disappeared. And you left Sarah alone with him?" James couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. "I left her because they were closing in. I thought if I led them away from her." Rebecca's voice broke. "But now they know she's with you. She's in more danger than ever." James was about to respond when his phone buzzed. A text from David. "Get out of there, now. They're coming." As if on cue, the security alarm began to wail. Through the window, James saw 3 black SUVs pulling up to his gate. Men in dark suits emerged, and one of them had a scar across his left cheek. "They're here," Rebecca whispered, her face draining of color. "James, you have to listen to me. There's a safe in my hotel room. Everything you need to know is inside, about your father, about the company, about why they want Sarah. The key is—" The sound of breaking glass cut her off. Someone had thrown something through the kitchen window. Smoke began to fill the room. "Upstairs!" James shouted, already running. "Margaret! Sarah!" He found them in Sarah's room, Margaret already holding the girl wrapped in his coat. Without a word, he scooped Sarah into his arms and grabbed Margaret's hand, pulling them toward the back stairs. "James!" Rebecca called from behind them. "The hotel is—" Another crash, closer this time. The smoke was getting thicker. They made it to the garage just as the first gunshot rang out. James bundled Sarah and Margaret into his car, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. As he peeled out of the garage, he caught a glimpse of Rebecca in his rearview mirror, standing in the doorway. She locked eyes with him one last time before turning back into the house. "Mommy!" Sarah screamed, but James couldn't stop. The black SUVs were already swinging around to follow them. "Hold on!" he ordered, pressing the accelerator to the floor. His security training kicked in, evasive driving patterns, quick turns through back streets, anything to lose their tail. Sarah sobbed quietly in the back seat, clutching his coat around her like armor. Margaret held her close, whispering soothing words, despite her own obvious fear. James's mind raced as he drove. Rebecca knew something big enough to get her killed. But she'd tried to tell him about a safe, about evidence. He needed to get to her hotel. But first, he had to get Sarah somewhere safe. What he didn't know then was that Rebecca's final message wasn't complete. The truth she'd died protecting was far more complicated than corporate espionage or old vendettas. It was a secret that would shake the foundations of everything James had built, everything he believed about himself and his family. As he weaved through traffic, trying to put distance between them and their pursuers, James made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth no matter the cost. He would protect Sarah, the daughter he'd just found, even if it meant losing everything else. But the men in the black SUVs weren't just hired muscle. They were part of something bigger, something that had been in motion since before Sarah was born. And they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted, even if it meant destroying everyone in their path. The old lake house hadn't changed in 20 years. James pulled up to the secluded cabin just as dawn was breaking over the water, the morning mist creating a protective curtain around them. Sarah had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, still wrapped in his coat, while Margaret kept a protective arm around her. "We should be safe here," James said quietly, killing the engine. "Nobody knows about this place except David." The cabin had belonged to his mother, her private retreat from his father's world of power plays and corporate manipulation. After her death, James had kept it maintained but never visited. Too many memories, too much pain. Now it would serve as their sanctuary. Inside, a layer of dust covered the furniture, but otherwise, the cabin was exactly as his mother had left it. James carried Sarah to the small bedroom off the main living area, gently laying her on the bed. Even in sleep, her face was pinched with worry, her small hands still clutching his coat. "She's so much like Rebecca," Margaret observed softly from the doorway. In 15 years as his assistant, she'd never seen James look so lost. "She has her eyes," he agreed, brushing Sarah's hair back from her forehead. "But that smile, that's my mother's smile." His phone buzzed. "David, the news is reporting a fire at your house," his friend said without preamble. "They found a body, James. It's Rebecca." James closed his eyes, grief and guilt washing over him. "She tried to tell me something, David. Something about a safe in her hotel room. About my father's old partners. I know which hotel, I'll check it out." David paused. "But James, there's more. I did some digging into those partners after our meeting. 3 of them died in accidents over the years. The 4th disappeared right around the time Rebecca got pregnant." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your father's suicide might not have been suicide at all, and whatever Rebecca knew about it, she took to her grave." After hanging up, James found Margaret in the kitchen, making coffee with supplies from the emergency kit he kept in his car. Her hands shook slightly as she poured 2 cups. "I should call the police," she said. "Report what happened." "No." James's voice was firm. "We can't trust anyone right now. These people, whoever they are, they have resources, connections. They found us at my house within hours of Rebecca showing up. Then what's our next move?" Before he could answer, a small voice came from the bedroom doorway. "Is my mom really dead?" They turned to find Sarah standing there, James's coat dragging on the floor behind her like a security blanket. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry, as if she'd run out of tears to cry. James knelt in front of her, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm so sorry." Sarah nodded slowly, processing this information with an eerily adult calmness. "The bad men found her, didn't they? The ones she was running from?" "I think so. But I promise you, Sarah, I won't let them find you." She studied his face intently. "That's what Mom said too. And Dad. They both promised, but they couldn't stop the bad men." The weight of her words hit James like a physical blow. This 6-year-old child had lost every adult who'd ever promised to protect her, yet somehow she was still standing, still fighting. "I'm different," he said firmly. "I'm not running away. We're going to face this together, and we're going to find out the truth." Sarah's lower lip trembled slightly. "Why do they want me? What did I do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart." James gathered her into his arms, feeling her small body shaking. "Sometimes bad people do bad things because they're afraid of the truth coming out, but we're going to find that truth." As he held her, James noticed something fall from the pocket of his coat, a small key on a silver chain. Sarah saw it too and gasped. "That's Mommy's special necklace," she said. "She always wore it, but she never told me what it was for." James picked up the key, examining it closely. It was old, possibly antique, with intricate engravings along its shaft. Rebecca must have slipped it into his coat pocket during the chaos at the house. His phone buzzed again. Another text from David. "Hotel room cleaned out. Someone got there first, but found this in the lobby security footage." The attached photo showed Rebecca checking in 2 days ago. Around her neck was the very key James now held in his hand. "Margaret," he said, his mind racing, "I need you to look after Sarah for a few hours. There's something I have to check." "No!" Sarah grabbed his arm, panic flooding her features. "You said you wouldn't leave." "I'm coming back, Sarah, I promise." He looked into her eyes, seeing his own determination reflected back. "But your mom left us a clue, and I need to follow it. It might help us understand why all this is happening." Margaret stepped forward. "Why don't we bake something while we wait? I saw some old cookie mix in the pantry." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between her fear of abandonment and the simple childhood pleasure of baking cookies. Finally, she gave a small nod, though she didn't let go of James's coat. "Keep your phone on," Margaret said quietly as James prepared to leave. "And James, Be careful. Rebecca died trying to protect whatever secret she was keeping. The drive back into Cincinnati felt longer than ever. James's mind was filled with fragments of memories. That summer with Rebecca, his father's increasingly erratic behavior in the months before his death, the mysterious disappearances of his business partners. He'd built his company on the ashes of his father's empire, never questioning how everything had fallen so perfectly into place. Now, 25 years later, those questions were demanding answers. The key led him to an old bank in the heart of downtown, one of those historic buildings that had survived countless modernization attempts. Inside, the marble floors and brass fixtures spoke of old money and older secrets. The safety deposit box opened with a satisfying click. Inside, James found a thick envelope addressed to him in Rebecca's handwriting and a small leather diary that he recognized with a jolt. It had belonged to his father. But before he could examine the contents, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number containing only a photo. His blood ran cold as he opened it. The image showed Sarah and Margaret in the cabin's kitchen, flour on their faces as they mixed cookie dough. It had been taken through the window moments ago. They'd been followed. Another buzz, this time a message. You have something we want. The girl has something we need. Choose wisely. James was already running to his car, his heart pounding. He'd made a terrible mistake leaving them alone. The diary and envelope were clutched in his hand, but he knew now that the truth they contained might cost him everything he held dear. What he didn't realize was that he was already too late. The forces that had been watching from the shadows for 25 years were finally ready to make their move. And the secret they were protecting was far more personal and far more devastating than James could possibly imagine. James's tires sprayed gravel as he sped back toward the lake house, the envelope and diary burning a hole in his jacket pocket. He tried calling Margaret repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. The silence felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. He was still 15 minutes away when David called. James, stop the car. They're at the cabin, David. They found them. Listen to me. David's voice cut through his panic. I've got eyes on the cabin. My team is in position. But if you come charging in there, you'll get them all killed. James pulled over, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. What do you see? 2 men inside with Sarah and Margaret. 3 more watching the perimeter. They're professionals, James, and they're waiting for you. Through the phone, James could hear the soft click of David checking his weapon. His old friend had been private security before becoming an investigator, but this situation was far beyond anything they'd dealt with before. Sarah, James whispered. Is she? She's alive. They both are. The men are searching the cabin, but they're being careful not to hurt them. They want something specific. James pulled out the envelope from his pocket. His father's diary, still unopened beside it. I think I know what they're looking for. Don't tell me, David said quickly. Not over the phone, but whatever it is, they think Sarah knows something about it. The way they're questioning her. James's blood ran cold. They're interrogating a 6-year-old girl? Gently for now. But James, these aren't ordinary criminals. The way they move, their communication patterns, they're trained. Military, maybe government. Inside the cabin, Sarah sat very still on the couch, still wrapped in James's coat, despite the warmth of the room. Margaret sat beside her, one arm protectively around the girl's shoulders. Both watched as the men methodically searched every drawer, every cabinet, every possible hiding place. The man with the scar, the one Sarah remembered from the park, crouched in front of her. His smile was practiced, gentle, but his eyes remained cold. Sarah, sweetheart, we just need to know what your mommy told you about the special box. You remember the box, don't you? The one she always kept hidden? Sarah's small fingers curled tighter into the coat's fabric. She didn't tell me anything. The man's smile tightened slightly. Now, we know that's not true. Your mommy would have wanted you to be safe. She would have told you where to find it if anything happened to her. Leave her alone, Margaret said firmly. She's just a child." The man didn't even glance at her. "Sarah, did your mommy ever give you anything special to keep? A key, maybe? Or tell you about a special place?" Sarah's eyes flicked briefly to James's coat before she could stop herself. The man noticed. "The coat," he said softly. "Check the coat." Before Margaret could protest, one of the other men stepped forward, reaching for Sarah. But as his hands touched the coat, Sarah let out a sound between a scream and a growl, throwing herself backward. "No!" she cried. "It's mine! James gave it to me!" The man with the scar held up his hand, stopping his colleague. "It's okay, Sarah. We don't have to take the coat. But maybe you could check the pockets for us. Show us there's nothing there." Sarah's lower lip trembled, but her voice was steady. "I already did. There's nothing in them." The man studied her face carefully. "You're very good at keeping secrets, aren't you, Sarah? Just like your mommy was. But you know what happened to her because of those secrets, don't you?" Sarah's face went pale, but before she could respond, a new sound cut through the tension. A phone ringing. The man pulled out a cell phone, checked the screen, and smiled. "Well, look who it is." He held the phone where Sarah could see it. On the screen was a photo of James's car pulled over on the side of the road. "Should we answer? Let Daddy know we're all waiting for him?" Outside the cabin, David watched through his scope as one of the men pulled out a phone. "They're making contact," he reported to James. "Whatever you do, don't—" But James was already answering the call. "Mr. Davidson." The voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent James couldn't place. "I believe we have something that belongs to each other. If you hurt them, please let's be civilized. We're all professionals here. Well, except for the child, of course, though I must say she's quite remarkable. Such loyalty, such strength. She reminds me of her mother, though the resemblance to your mother is quite striking as well." James felt his breath catch. This man had always known who Sarah was. "What do you want?" "The diary, Mr. Davidson, and the envelope. In exchange, you get the girl and your assistant back, unharmed. Everyone goes home happy. How do I know I can trust you?" The man chuckled softly. "You don't, but you don't have a choice. You have 30 minutes to make the exchange. After that, well, children can be so accident-prone around water." The line went dead. James immediately called David back. "I heard," David said before James could speak. "It's a trap. You know that." "Of course it is. But I'm going in anyway." "James, no, listen to me. I need you to get ready. When I give the signal, your team takes out the perimeter guards, but the men inside, leave them to me. What are you planning?" James started his car, his mind racing back 25 years to lessons his father had taught him that he'd tried so hard to forget. "I'm going to show them why the Davidson name used to mean something in this city." Back in the cabin, Sarah sat perfectly still, her small face set in determination. The man with the scar had stepped away to take another call, leaving one guard watching them while the others continued their search. Margaret leaned down, whispering so softly, only Sarah could hear. "Whatever happens, stay close to me. Don't let go of the coat." Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, her hand sliding into the coat's hidden inner pocket, where her fingers closed around something small and cold. Something her mother had sewn into the lining just days ago, the last time she'd seen her. The man with the scar returned, his face tight with anticipation. "Your father's coming, Sarah. Isn't that nice? One big family reunion." But Sarah wasn't listening. She was remembering her mother's last words to her, whispered during their final hug. "When the time comes, princess, trust the coat, trust James, and whatever you do, don't let them see what you can do." The sun was setting over the lake, casting long shadows through the cabin windows. In 20 minutes, those shadows would provide perfect cover for David's team. In 25 minutes, James would walk through the front door. And in 30 minutes, Sarah knew everything would change, because the real secret, the one her mother had died protecting, wasn't in any diary or envelope. It was in her. The last rays of sunlight painted the lake blood red as James approached the cabin on foot, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. The envelope and diary were clearly visible in his jacket pocket. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path, each step measured and deliberate. Inside, Sarah sat absolutely still, her small body tense with anticipation. She could feel something building in the air, like the electricity before a storm. Margaret's hand was steady on her shoulder, but Sarah could feel her trembling slightly. The man with the scar watched through the window, his practiced smile gone now, replaced by an expression of cold calculation. "Bring him in," he ordered, and one of his men opened the front door. James entered slowly, his eyes immediately finding Sarah's. In that brief moment of connection, he saw something in her gaze that made him pause. Not fear, but determination. She was trying to tell him something. "That's far enough," the scarred man said. "The diary and envelope, if you please." "Let them go first," James replied, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. The man sighed as if disappointed. "Mr. Davidson, I don't think you understand your position here. You have something we want. We have something you love. The difference is, what you're holding can be replaced. What we're holding—" He glanced at Sarah meaningfully. James felt a surge of rage, but kept his expression neutral. "At least let me see that they're unharmed." "Daddy," Sarah said softly, and something in her voice made everyone in the room look at her. She was still wrapped in his coat, but she sat straighter now, her chin lifted slightly. "It's okay, I remember what Mom said." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly did your mother say, Sarah?" But Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was looking at James, and her next words made his blood run cold. "She said to tell you about the music box, the one in Grandma's room." James felt his heart skip a beat. His mother's music box had been empty when she died. He'd checked it himself, but the way Sarah emphasized the words, the scarred man stepped forward. "What music box? What's in it?" "Show them, Daddy," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Show them what Grandma left." James understood. Sarah was creating a diversion, but for what? His eyes darted to Margaret, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever was about to happen, they were ready. "The music box is upstairs," James said carefully, "in the master bedroom, but I'll only show it to you, not your men." The scarred man considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Harris, Chen, watch them. Mr. Davidson and I are going to take a little walk upstairs." As they climbed the stairs, James could feel the weight of the diary and envelope in his pocket, but something told him they weren't what these men were really after. The way they'd questioned Sarah, their insistence that she knew something. The master bedroom was exactly as his mother had left it. The music box sat on the dresser, covered in dust. James approached it slowly, aware of the man close behind him. "Open it," the scarred man ordered. James reached for the lid, his fingers brushing the intricate carvings. His mother had loved this box, had played it every night before bed. The familiar melody began to play as he lifted the lid. The man stepped closer, peering inside. "It's empty." "No," James said softly. "It's not." In that moment, several things happened at once. Downstairs, Sarah suddenly stood up, letting James's coat fall open. The hidden pocket his mother had sewn into the lining 25 years ago, the one only a child's small hands could reach, was empty now. A high-pitched sound filled the air, like crystals singing. The two guards downstairs clutched their heads, dropping their weapons. Margaret moved with surprising speed, kicking one gun away, while Sarah grabbed the other, sliding it across the floor under the couch. Upstairs, James slammed the music box lid down on the scarred man's reaching hand. The man howled in pain, but James was already moving, driving his elbow up into the man's jaw. Outside, David's team moved in silently, taking down the perimeter guards with practiced efficiency. But it was what Sarah did next that changed everything. Standing in the center of the room, her small face set in concentration, she pulled something from her pocket. A small crystal, no bigger than a marble. It glowed with an inner light, pulsing in time with the high-pitched sound. "No!" the scarred man shouted from upstairs, having broken free from James. "Don't let her activate it!" But it was too late. The crystal in Sarah's hand flared brilliantly, and suddenly every electronic device in the cabin went dead. The lights, the phones, even the men's radio earpieces, all silent. In the darkness, Sarah's voice was clear and strong. "Mommy said you wouldn't understand. She said only a Davidson could make it work." "Dade?" James reached the bottom of the stairs, just as David's team breached the cabin. The scarred man was right behind him, but he froze when he saw Sarah holding the crystal. "All these years," the man said, his voice filled with something like awe. "We thought Rebecca had it. We never imagined she'd give it to the child." "Give what to the child?" James demanded. "What is that thing?" The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound in the darkness. "Your father's legacy, Mr. Davidson. The real reason your family's company was so successful, the thing that could change the world or destroy it." Sarah looked at James, her eyes reflecting the crystal's glow. Grandma knew they'd come for it. That's why she hid it in the coat. She knew someday there'd be someone small enough to reach it, someone with Davidson blood who could make it work. The pieces began falling into place in James's mind. His father's mysterious success, the disappearance of his partners, Rebecca's desperate attempts to keep Sarah hidden. "The crystal is some kind of technology," he said slowly. "Something my father developed." "More than that," the scarred man replied. "It's the key to clean, unlimited energy. Your father discovered it, but he couldn't control it. Only certain people can. People with a specific genetic marker. A marker that apparently your daughter inherited." Sarah stepped closer to James, the crystal still pulsing in her small hand. "Mommy said I had to keep it safe until I found you. She said together we could protect it, like Grandma wanted." James looked at his daughter. This small, brave girl who had endured so much, who had carried such an impossible burden. The truth about his family's past, about Sarah's importance, about everything that had led to this moment. It was almost too much to comprehend. But one thing was crystal clear. These men, whoever they were, would never stop hunting them. The only way to protect Sarah now was to understand what they were dealing with. And the answers, he realized, were in his pocket, in his father's diary, and Rebecca's final message. The scarred man seemed to read his thoughts. "Those documents won't help you, Mr. Davidson. Your father's secrets died with him. The only thing that matters now is the girl. Give her to us, and you can walk away. Fight us and, well, accidents happen." James stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her with his body. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "My father's secrets did die with him. But Sarah isn't a secret. She's my daughter. And if you want her, you'll have to go through me." The man's scarred face twisted into a sneer. "So be it." Outside, the sun had finally set, plunging the lake into darkness. But inside the cabin, Sarah's crystal cast a soft, pulsing light, a beacon of hope, or perhaps a warning of things to come. Either way, James knew their lives would never be the same. The real question was, what would he do with the truth once he had it? In the crystalline glow emanating from Sarah's small hand, James could see the truth written across the scarred man's face. This wasn't about corporate espionage or old vendettas. This was about power, pure, world-changing power, hidden within a crystal that only his daughter could control. "Last chance, Mr. Davidson," the scarred man said softly. "Give us the girl and the crystal. Walk away with your life." James felt Sarah's free hand slip into his, tiny fingers gripping with surprising strength. In that touch, he felt decades of secrets, lies and sacrifices converging into a single moment of clarity. "You still don't understand," James replied. "This isn't a negotiation. This is me protecting my family. The scarred man's composure cracked. Your family. Your father was weak. He could have changed the world with this technology, but he was too afraid to use it. Your mother hid it away like a coward. And Rebecca, she ran, leaving her own daughter to fend for herself. You're wrong. Sarah's voice rang out, clear and strong. Mommy wasn't afraid. She was waiting. Waiting for what, child? For me to find my dad. For us to be together. The crystal pulsed brighter in her hand. Grandma knew. She left messages in the music box, in the coat. She knew someday there would be another Davidson who could make it work the right way. James pulled the diary and envelope from his pocket. With David's team covering the exits and the scarred man's men disarmed, he finally had a moment to uncover the truth. He opened the diary first, his father's familiar handwriting jumping off the pages. The crystal responds to emotion, he read aloud. Not just DNA. The closer the familial bond, the stronger the connection. But it has to be pure, untainted by greed or fear. That's why it never worked for me. I wanted to use it, control it. The crystal needs to be guided, not controlled. The scarred man laughed bitterly. Pretty words from a failure. Your father killed himself rather than give us the crystal. But you're not him, are you, James? You're a businessman. You understand value. You're right, James said, moving to Rebecca's envelope next. I do understand value. That's why I understand exactly what my father was protecting us from. Inside the envelope was a single photograph and a handwritten letter. The photo showed his parents on their wedding day, young and happy, but it was what his mother was wearing that caught his eye, a small crystal pendant glowing faintly, even in the old photograph. My mother could use it too, he whispered. That's why she hid it in the coat. She knew someday there would be another woman in the family who shared her gift. Sarah stepped closer, the crystal's light growing warmer. Grandma left me a message in the music box, Daddy. Every night when Mommy played it for me, I could hear her voice. She told me about the crystal, about how special our family is. She said when I found you, you'd understand. The scarred man's patience snapped. Enough of this nonsense. He pulled a concealed weapon, aiming it at James. Give us the girl and the crystal, or I'll kill you right here. But Sarah was already moving. The crystal flared in her hand, its light filling the cabin with a brilliant glow. Every electronic device in the room surged with power. Phones, watches, even the gun's electronic sights. Sarah, no! James reached for her, but Margaret held him back. Watch, she whispered. The crystal's energy wrapped around Sarah like a protective cocoon. Her eyes, so like her grandmother's, held a wisdom far beyond her years. When she spoke, her voice carried an echo of generations of Davidsons. Grandma said the crystal isn't a weapon, she said calmly. It's a gift. It only works with love. That's why you could never control it. You don't know how to love anything except power. The scarred man's hand shook as he tried to maintain his aim on James. You're just a child. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand everything, Sarah replied. I understand why Mommy ran, why Grandma hid the crystal, why Daddy built his company differently than Grandpa did. Our family learned from its mistakes. The crystal taught us how. James watched in awe as the energy field around his daughter expanded, gently pushing back everyone in the room except him. He felt drawn toward her, the crystal's light reaching out to him like a long-lost friend. The crystal doesn't create energy, he realized aloud, remembering passages from his father's diary. It amplifies what's already there. The stronger the love, the stronger the connection. Sarah nodded, a smile breaking across her face. That's why I had to find you, Daddy. That's why Mommy made sure I would. Together, we can use it the way it's meant to be used. The scarred man's weapon clattered to the floor as the crystal's energy field passed over him. His men, already subdued by David's team, watched in stunned silence as father and daughter stood in the center of the room, bathed in otherworldly light. Your father died protecting this secret. the scarred man said, his voice hollow. "Are you prepared to do the same?" James looked at his daughter, this miraculous child who had survived abandonment, fear, and loss, yet still maintained the capacity to love so purely that she could control one of the most powerful forces on earth. "My father died because he tried to face this alone," James replied. "He thought he had to carry the burden by himself, but Sarah showed us the truth. The crystal's power comes from connection, from family. That's what you never understood." Sarah reached up and took his hand, the crystal glowing between their joined fingers. In that moment, James felt what his father never could. The pure, unconditional love between parent and child, amplified by the crystal's ancient power. "It's over," he said to the scarred man. "The crystal stays in our family, protected by love, not fear. If you ever come near my daughter again, you'll learn exactly what this power can do in the hands of people who know how to use it properly." The scarred man looked from father to daughter, seeing decades of careful planning crumbling before his eyes. His organization had spent years trying to replicate the crystal's power, never understanding that the key wasn't in the technology, it was in the heart. As David's team began securing the scene, Sarah looked up at James, her eyes bright with tears and triumph. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" Home. The word carried new meaning now. His house might have burned, but home wasn't a place. It was this connection, this unbreakable bond between father and daughter. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly. "We can go home." But as Sarah nestled into his arms, the crystal still glowing softly between them, James knew their journey wasn't over. The scarred man's organization wouldn't give up easily. Rebecca's death still demanded justice, and somewhere in his father's diary lay more secrets waiting to be uncovered. The truth about the Davidson legacy was finally coming to light. The question was, were they ready for what that truth would reveal? 1 year later, Sarah stood in front of her new bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting the crystal pendant that now hung safely around her neck. The morning sun caught its facets, sending tiny rainbows dancing across her walls. She was no longer the frightened, hungry child from the streets, though she still kept James's coat hanging in her closet, a reminder of where their journey had begun. James watched from the doorway of their new home, marveling at how much had changed in 12 months. The scarred man's organization had been exposed, their illegal operations shut down through a combination of David's evidence and information from his father's diary. But the crystal's true power remained a family secret, protected by love and understanding rather than force. "Ready for your first day of school?" he asked, smiling as Sarah smoothed her dress for the 10th time. She nodded, though her fingers nervously played with the crystal. "What if the other kids think I'm weird? Then they're missing out on knowing someone extraordinary." James knelt beside her, his own crystal pendant, his mother's wedding gift, glowing faintly in response to Sarah's. "Remember what we learned? Being different isn't bad," she recited. "It's a gift, like the crystal, and gifts are meant to be used to help others." The past year had been a journey of discovery for both of them. Through his father's diary, they'd learned the crystal's true origins, not a weapon or an energy source, but a tool for healing. The Davidson family had been its guardians for generations, using its power to help others, while keeping its existence secret from those who would abuse it. Sarah's grandmother had been a hospital volunteer, using the crystal's energy to ease the pain of terminal patients. James's father had tried to expand its power through technology, but lost sight of the human connection that made it work. Now, Sarah was learning to use her gift in her own way. "Miss Chen says I'm getting better at controlling it," Sarah said proudly. Their former assistant, Margaret Chen, had become much more than an employee. She was family now, helping Sarah understand her abilities while managing the charitable foundation James had established in Rebecca's memory. The Rebecca Mitchell Foundation provided support for abandoned and homeless children, turning the tragedy of Sarah's past into hope for others. but its true purpose, known only to a trusted few, was to search for other children who might share the crystal's gift. "Daddy!" Sarah's voice pulled James from his thoughts. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" James felt his heart tighten. They'd given Rebecca a proper burial, and Sarah visited the grave every week, leaving wildflowers and telling her mother about all the good things they were doing with the crystal. "She was always proud of you, sweetheart. She protected you until we could find each other. And now we're continuing her work, helping others the way she would have wanted." Sarah smiled, touching the crystal gently. "Sometimes I can feel her, you know, when the crystal glows really bright, like she's still watching over us." James understood. He felt his own mother's presence sometimes, especially when Sarah used the crystal in ways that echoed her grandmother's gentle, healing touch. The Davidson women had always been the crystal's true guardians, passing their wisdom down through generations. The doorbell rang, Margaret arriving to drive Sarah to school. They had decided it was time for Sarah to have as normal a childhood as possible, while learning to balance her unique gifts with everyday life. "Remember," James said as they walked downstairs, "the crystal's power comes from love," Sarah finished. "Not fear. I remember, Daddy." Margaret waited in the foyer, her own smile bright with pride. She'd been instrumental in helping them understand the crystal's capabilities, her practical nature balancing James's protective instincts and Sarah's natural abilities. "The car's ready," she announced, "and I've got my special phone just in case." The phone, modified with crystal energy, would alert them if Sarah needed help or if anyone suspicious came near the school. As they prepared to leave, James caught a glimpse of their reflection in the hallway mirror, father, daughter, and trusted friend, each wearing a crystal pendant that glowed with shared purpose. They looked like a normal family heading off to a normal day, but they carried within them the power to change the world. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly, turning back to hug James tightly. "I almost forgot something." "What's that?" She looked up at him, her eyes shining with the same determination he'd seen that first day at the cabin. "Thank you for finding me, for not giving up, even when it was dangerous." James knelt down, holding his daughter close. "Sarah, finding you wasn't just luck or chance. It was the crystal leading us to each other. Your mother knew that someday we'd be together, that we'd learn to use this gift the right way. As a family," Sarah added softly. "As a family," he agreed. They watched from the doorway as Margaret helped Sarah into the car, the morning sun catching the crystals around their necks. James thought about how far they'd come, from a chance encounter with a hungry child to uncovering a legacy that spanned generations. The scarred man and his organization were gone, but James knew there would always be people who sought to control the crystal's power. The difference was, now they were ready. The Davidson family had learned from its past mistakes. The crystal wasn't meant to be hidden away in fear or used for personal gain. It was meant to bring light to dark places, to heal wounds, both physical and emotional. As the car pulled away, Sarah waved from the window, her crystal catching the sunlight one last time. James touched his own pendant, feeling the familiar warmth of its energy. Energy powered not by technology or force, but by the simple, unbreakable bond between father and daughter. They had taken a tragic history, abandonment, loss, and fear, and transformed it into something beautiful. Sarah was no longer the scared little girl stealing bread to survive. She was a Davidson, carrying forward a legacy of love and healing that would touch countless lives. And James was no longer the lonely businessman focused only on success. He was a father, a protector, and a guardian of a power greater than corporate empires or material wealth. Together, they had discovered that true strength comes not from controlling power, but from sharing it with love. As he turned back into the house, James smiled, remembering Sarah's words from that pivotal night at the cabin. Grandma knew someday there would be another Davidson who could make it work the right way. She had been right. The crystal had found its way home, back to a family that finally understood its true purpose. And in doing so, it had given James something far more precious than power or success. It had given him a daughter, a purpose, and a chance to heal not just others, but himself. The crystal around his neck pulsed warmly, resonating with Sarah's even at a distance, a constant reminder that love, not fear, was the greatest power of all. And as long as that love remained strong, the Davidson legacy would continue, bringing light to the darkness, one heart at a time.